Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Taylor Rockwell. Daryl Grove is not with me today. Don't worry, everything is fine. This was a pre-planned Daryl not being in office sort of situation. He will be back with me tomorrow. We're going to be breaking down in like semi-quick take, hot take fashion the USA's game against Costa Rica. It probably won't be like the full in-depth watching the game 4 times from 15 different angles, as Alexis Carreros likes to make fun of us for, but still detailed and hopefully interesting and informative. But yeah, so Daryl back in studio in the afternoon with me tomorrow. But speaking of Daryl, I did want to briefly say thank you to everyone who has helped spread the word about his GoFundMe. I've included a link to that in the show notes, or at least I hope I have. I haven't written them yet, but I plan to. But his GoFundMe has, I think in fewer than 24 hours, has exploded, is a good way to put it. It's amazing to see how many people care about him and care about the work he has done. And it's pretty amazing as his friend to see just how many kind of lives he's touched, if you'll forgive me for being emotional for a moment, because he's a pretty great guy. So to see kind of the American soccer community come together, amazing broadcasters and podcasters and writers and friends and everyone in between have come out to help Mr. Grove and support Mr. Grove, and I know he feels that love considerably. So thank you to everyone who has helped get involved there. So that's my emotional moment. Now I'll get to my serious journalist mode and say instead of talking to Daryl today, I'm talking to Sebastian Salazar of ESPN. You know him as their sideline reporter who's switching back and forth between Spanish and English, but he does many, many other things for ESPN. He's done many, many other things in his career. We talk about some of that. We talk about Deadline Day. That obviously happened yesterday. He was covering it for ESPN. Some of the deals that went on there, some of the deals that did not end up happening. Luciano Acosta looking in your direction. We talk U.S. national team, what his thoughts have been thus far of the Gregg Berhalter era, and he gives one of my favorite answers ever, I think we've had on this show, to which player on the national team kind of is going to let their teammates know when they need to work a little bit harder, when they should have done better. I thought that was terrific. So I really enjoyed the interview. I should note I had allotted like 20 to 30 minutes. That's what I had talked to Sebastian about before we started recording. It's an hour long, as you can no doubt see, because he is very generous with his time and he gives great answers. So I really like this conversation. Hopefully you all will as well. So without anything else from me, here's Seba. Joining me all the way from frigid Connecticut, I've got ESPN's Sebastian Salazar. Sebastian, thank you very much for taking the time to join the Total Soccer Show today.
Hey, great to be with you. Excited for it.
Yeah, so you're up there right now. You're like bunkered down in the hotel, it sounds like. Is it as cold as I've heard?
Yes, it is very, very cold up here. I'm a little closer to you usually. I'm down in D.C., mm-hmm. But it is freezing up here. It was, when it's a single digit or a negative on your phone, when you look for that temperature in the morning, it's pretty daunting. This is just between us, because if the guys on the show were to ever find this out, they would give me even more guff than they already do. But it's so cold just generally here. And then even in our studio, they keep it so damn cold. I wear long johns underneath my pants.
Do you really?
In studio for like 4 out of the 12 months of the year up here. Yeah, it is. It's just, I might run a little cold generally, but this time of year and this stretch specifically is not helping me.
Well, first of all, thank you for confirming that the guys on the show do not listen to this show, so that's good to know. So you can drop that knowledge here. But I also that feels like some crafty broadcasting, or like a tip that you've learned from your years like on the sidelines and being out in the cold is just always have long johns on and you're good to go.
Layers, bro, layers. It's so funny. Well, one, I have to admit, I'm like really soft. Like I just run cold. I mean, I think a lot of people usually stereotype and they say, oh, in the relationship, like the woman is the one that runs the thermostat. Like in our house, like my wife is always like, are you crazy? Like, why do you keep messing with that thing? So I definitely, we were just in Arizona, for the for the U.S. game.
That's a difference.
Right, but wait, it's 75 during the day, but it's like 38 at night in Arizona. So you're going to be shocked. I had long johns in Arizona,
there you go.
Too.
That's outstanding. Yeah, I forgot.
I felt like an idiot when I realized they had a roof on the stadium, and I was probably going to be all right. But you don't want to be cold out there in the desert night.
Yeah, you'd rather be over hot than freezing cold. That's what I'd say. Since we're going on a personal front, I'm going to keep it going. I'm going to begin our transfer and U.S. men's national team conversation by talking baby names. My wife and I are like in the stage of maybe possibly talking about potentially one day having a child, which is to say that she has her list of baby names that have come together. Sebastian is on that list. I'm curious, how difficult was that name growing up as a kid, or did you automatically have nicknames?
Yeah, so let's remember the era in which I grew up. I was born in '83.
Oh, so you were a hermit crab or whatever, or a lobster or whatever.
No, I was Sebastian the Crab from The Little Mermaid, and like that came out in like second or third grade for me. So for a while, man, I hated my name. I was like, I don't want to be Sebastian the Crab, and I was like a little kid too. They're like, everybody call you little crab. And then as I got like older, I really started to appreciate the name. And like of course, people come up to you, oh, what a beautiful name, and like not for nothing, when I was like in my younger days, like a lot of times the opposite sex would come up and be like, oh, it's such a beautiful name, and it would be as a conversation starter.
Okay.
So, and it does lend itself to a million different nicknames. I mean, most of my friends know me as Sebi. I go by that on Twitter. Seabass, Seba, Bassy, Seb, Sebasti. My mom is the only one that calls me that.
Sebastian,
so, and then there are ones that aren't safe for print. So yeah, man, it's a very versatile name.
Okay.
I think, and I'll tell you the real truth of the story. The reason it was selected is because it's one of the very few names, or the names that has the fewest change when you switch it from English to Spanish.
Oh,
so my mom and dad wanted a name that was going to sound basically the same. And Sebastian is you don't change spelling. It's pretty much exactly the same. So it works in both languages without like having to change your identity, I guess.
Wow. All right, then. That makes a lot of sense. And what was your background growing up? Or just what was your background, I guess is a better way to put that question.
Yeah, it hasn't changed, I don't think. No, my mom is, I grew up in D.C., born and raised in the D.C. area, really in like just outside the city on the Maryland side. I live downtown now. And then, even though I was born in Northern Virginia, but my mom is from Mexico City. She came to the United States maybe in her late 20s to study at the University of Southern California Pharmacy School. And that's where she actually met my dad, who is like, from rural Western New York. So really two people from totally opposite ends of the world. And that's my background.
Right on. And then your route into where you are now, I know some people go like the pro going into broadcasting route. You've been broadcasting from the jump. Is that correct? Yeah, no, I figured out pretty young I wasn't good enough to go pro, or maybe I should say other people figured it out for me. I loved playing. I was a rat. I was a kid that was always around the game, but I was always a kid that always enjoyed watching, sports television as well. I grew up in the era where I remember the day we got cable. I remember being excited that like ESPN was an all sports network. And it's probably like 15 or 16 years old when I realized I wasn't going to play for DC United. Then I was like, okay, well, cool. What's the next closest thing? And it was, let's go into sports broadcasting. And honestly, at the time, I never thought I would have like a full-time job around soccer broadcasting in the United States. Because when I graduated college, that didn't exist. Like I couldn't even tell you I'm doing my dream job now because it didn't exist when I came out of school. So I mean, you're on the phone with a podcaster right now. So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, this is all kind of new. This business and this demand for soccer content, and I'm lucky just I think in the timing of when I came around.
Actually, one more question then on that front was like, so if ESPN was this kind of like formative memory for you, how big of a deal was it for you when you got hired by ESPN? And is it still sort of like surreal to walk into that campus? Yeah, because you know what, since I'm not here all the time, like I come up to campus once, maybe twice a month, depending on the schedule. Most of my work is on the road. There is still some elements of kind of wow for me when I come up here. And then, you also have your moments, and they fade. They're not as frequent anymore. But like I saw Randy Moss in ESPN cafeteria a couple months ago for the first time, and I was like, oh my God, that wow.
Was a pretty cool moment. So yeah, I think anybody that works in this business for whatever, like ESPN in many ways is what we think of as kind of the final destination. I think you can be happy at a million other places. And I never really set out ESPN necessarily as like an end-all be-all goal. But really for me, it was just about doing all soccer. And when I figured I could do an all soccer job and that it happened to be for ESPN, then it was really like, wow, you need to pinch yourself, bro. Like, I don't think this is real.
Did you have to pinch yourself yesterday due to the maybe lack of major news that happened on transfer deadline day? Because I feel like we I expected that to keep being this big thing, and it kind of never made it to that level.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny, right? Because it cuts both ways. So we're in the show, and usually we record it around 4:30. But when the deadline doesn't close until 6 o'clock Eastern, it pushes everything back. So we're like, all right, we have to wait till 6 to do anything of note, because what if something happens at 5:58? We can't not talk about it or talk about it. And, some stuff trickles out well after the deadline, and we'll address those things on Friday's show. But yeah, I think that, this feels like an annual thing with the January transfer window, that there's a lot of teams that you think are desperate. But the reality is there's not a ton of overwhelming talent that's moving in January. Mm-hmm. So what you find yourself doing is you're like, oh, they signed who? Cool. Let me get that Wikipedia out quick, and it's not as, when you can't talk about the players because you haven't seen them as much because they're from a league that you don't have as much access to. It takes some of the fun away. I think that for me was mitigated yesterday by everything that was happening. Kind of still yesterday, the fallout from Almiron, the drama of the Luciano Acosta thing, which for me as a DC United fan, I was like living my own personal emotional roller coaster yesterday. One on which I still don't know where I've settled today, and so I think, in some ways, yesterday was a huge dud. Like, for the show, we actually led talking about Chelsea and Sarri and all that instead of the transfer stuff. But it was also, for me as an MLS guy and somebody who's kind of come up, with this league, it was also really cool to seemingly out of the blue suddenly be in the international transfer market. Not just like dipping our toe in, but like head first, oh my God, what's happening? Chaos that I think clubs around the world are accustomed to.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on that one. So let's stick with some of the domestic ones, or like the MLS-centric ones, starting with Luciano Acosta. I know the logical one would be to go to Almiron, as you mentioned, but Acosta, for me, as a nominal DC fan, I'll go with you then. I was not expecting him to be linked with PSG. I was not expecting him to be on a plane to PSG to take a medical. How surprised were you when this move came to be, and how surprised you when it seemed like it was actually going to happen? I know it has not happened. I should say that up front, but I'm wondering if you two were equally shocked by this one.
Yeah, no. Look, a link to a team never surprises me, because especially this time of year, any time of year, like, agents do work. So if you see a link of anybody, okay. But really, the first report that we saw links and stuff with Saudi Arabia. The first report that we got about PSG wasn't some foreign, it was Steve Goff, who if Steve publishes it, you can put it on my tombstone. And he PSG leaving tonight, it was like, whoa, this isn't smoke where there's fire. Like the fire, we're seeing it right now, and Steve's writing about it. Mm-hmm. So that shocked me. I have to say that really, that it first came from Steve really was like, oh my gosh, this is for real. And then you start asking yourself, well, okay, this is a shock. Why is it a shock? Because I don't think Lucha's that good, or because I think PSG is so great. And then when you think, okay, PSG 24 hours ago got the news that Neymar's out 10 weeks. They need basically a 10-week rental, right? So to them, $6, $8, $10 million for a 10-week rental is probably not that much. And they probably don't, they're never going to get a Neymar like for like. That player doesn't exist. But if a player close to that existed in any type of European theater, you'd pay 30, 40, 50, 60 million pounds or euros for him. Lucho comes from a market that, let's be honest, the MLS market, because of wages here, mostly around the domestic player, but it affects foreign players as well. I think the wages are just kind of generally suppressed. So Lucho's wages, what his value is coming from MLS is not equal to what it would be if he was coming from a league in Europe. So I think if you start thinking about it in that way, why might this make sense? You say, okay, I could see maybe how this would play out. And I have to tell you, when they got him on the plane, I thought he was gone.
Yep.
I kind of started to tell myself in my head, you know what, like, all right, so DC United season is not going to be maybe as a fan what I was hoping for, what I thought it was.
Yeah.
No more Lucharu. But, I kind of did start to feel like Lucho was one of our guys, and maybe it'll be cool. And I can I'm okay, and I would love to see what he does at PSG, and I'll root for him, and I'll still feel somehow attached to him, and that'll be it's an important step for the club. And then when it kind of fell apart late last night, I was stuck, and it's kind of where I am this morning emotionally, just as a fan. I thought I should be happy this morning that Lucho's back, but the feeling that I actually woke up with was disappointment and sadness. I feel intensely for Luciano Acosta. This was a kid in Goff's article described as shaking with excitement as he takes off. It's a dream move. He's always talked about Europe publicly, privately. He's talked about that being his dream. And to be so close to not just the dream, but the high end of the dream, and PSG and Mbappe and Cavani, and sure, Neymar if and when he comes back. And then to have the rug pulled out from under you. And look, he loves DC, but to have to go back to a place you thought you had kind of graduated from, I think it could derail him. I think it could derail DC United season. And honestly, beyond that, I just feel for the kid on a human level, like, what a disappointment. And that's what I've come out of yesterday with. I'm not actually happy that I am happy that he's coming back. And I'm sure when he, walks past a Red Bull defender, I'm not going to be complaining. But right now, I feel for the guy more than I'm happy for the team.
So I want to get to the emotional aspect of that in a second, because I agree with you 100%. But first, I wanted to ask, from what you've seen and heard, what was the thing that caused this deal to break down? Because he's there in Paris. It seems like it's going to happen. It doesn't end up getting done. So what were the hurdles, the obstacles? Well,
I'll give credit where it's due, and I think it's, we talk all the time about journalism, and we don't talk about it necessarily here, but, what is journalism worth? Pablo Maurer is a colleague of mine for many years. He writes for The Athletic, and along with Steve Goff, they've been all over this. And Pablo has some incredible details in the story that he published on The Athletic. I think, if you read everything that we can consume on this so far, it seems to me as though DC United got into a situation where they were either going to have to let Lucho go from far less than they were comfortable for in kind of a rushed emergency deal. Let's be honest, something that DC United at this level as an organization, the individuals in that front office have never been through, right? Have never been in this theater. And PSG, I think, was not as interested in Lucho as DC United believed they were. Mm-hmm. So when the haggling began, I think both parties realized maybe we're not as ready to do this as we'd like. And I can imagine, but when you're the player and you're there and you're seeing it fall apart, I can only imagine what that was like. And, it would have been a huge windfall for DC United too. So I'm sure there's some kind of disappointment on that end for the club as well. You have to look at what they paid for Lucho, $1.5 million, anything, 8, 10 million, 6 million would have been a great return on investment there from a DC United perspective. But I actually give the club a lot of credit. If they felt like they were going to be rushed into a really bad deal, and they're looking at the Almiron $25 million, 20 million pounds, however you want to break it down, and they're saying, look, Lucho's he may not be Almiron. They're the same age. They're coming off almost the same season statistically, and he's not a third of Almiron. He's not a quarter of Almiron. So, and I appreciate that the club said, you know what, winning and losing games and being a strong team and not getting taken advantage of is worth more than recouping a cool $4 million that we got to ship some off to the league anyway.
So for his emotional state, then, do you think that helps at all? Because I saw there was a great tweet. I'm sorry, I can't remember who did it, but it was you have to feel for him. He goes from playing Man United in the Champions League to preparing for a preseason friendly against the Bethlehem Steel. It's a difference.
Right.
But I do you feel like it's mitigated at all by the fact that the club were sort of, or DC United were sort of we need this player, we want it to be done right. This isn't going to work for us in this situation, and it shows that they're valuing him. Is that a minor conciliatory thing in the grand scheme of things, or does it not really matter?
Look, I think the only I don't think that matters, because at the end of the day, if the player wants to move, does it really matter why the club decided not to let him move? If it is the club's decision at the end of the day, then it's kind of on them. My one hope is that as this story comes out and we get more and more details, the story that will emerge, I'm not saying this, but this is the story that could emerge that I think could salvage the Lucho DC United relationship. No, I'm not saying it's broken, but that could make it so Lucho isn't mad at the club, is that or doesn't have those feelings of, hey, did the club not let me go, is if we find out that PSG was really where this broke down, that really they weren't interested, that there's more to this story on the PSG side. And then I think maybe it doesn't affect, but that's a personal thing that he's going to have to conquer. And that comes down to who he is, his moods, how he feels. I'll say this though, I think never was Wayne Rooney more valuable to DC United than for the next month and a half with Lucho, because Lucho, really reveres him in some way and seemed to kind of, I think towards the end of last year, maybe the Rooney hype train was, those who weren't watching were maybe forgetting about Lucho a little bit, but they seemed to not just work really well together on the field. That was evident to a lot of us, but there seemed to be something in Lucho that clicked on when Rooney showed up. And I think, that having that key alpha figure in the locker room will be important when Lucho comes back from this clear disappointment, for Rooney to kind of be like, hey, that's what it's like at that level. And when those disappointments happen, you gotta keep chucking through. And I hope that expertise, all that Rooney has lived, he can really impart to Lucho, because this is a tough thing that Lucho's gone through. I hope people can really humanize him here and be like, wow, if I had thought I was getting a promotion and I was, hanging up my diploma on the wall, and then they said, oh no, you'd be crushed.
You absolutely would, but you're right though. Like, this may sound a little like weirdly abstract, but like you're right, because I think of Wayne Rooney as like Wayne Rooney. I think of him as like, oh, he scores goals for Manchester United, scores goals for England, now he scores goals here. You hear the kind of crazy stories about him, but you don't really think about, or at least I've never really thought about like what he actually brings in terms of that locker room and the experience he has. That you're right, like that would be a person that you could look to, because to me he's like, oh yeah, he's getting drunk in an airport, he's this crazy guy, and in reality, like, no, he's a human who played in the World Cup and played for one of the biggest teams on the planet. So being able to have him say like, yeah, that's how it goes and it's really rough, but like keep doing it, you're right, that is a very like good stroke of fortune for Acosta and for probably DC United and DC United fans. So that's a positive. If you want to go further positive with MLS, the Almiron transfer, that's probably the big one. Because I don't think I would have expected maybe at this time last year for an MLS player to be being sold to a Premier League club for quite that amount of money. With the deal going through, how big of a deal do you think this is for the league? How big of a deal do you think it is for Miguel Almiron?
Well, let's start with Miguel. I think he is very unique. A lot of times when you talk to people from South America, right, from the Latin American game, whether it's players themselves or managers or analysts or media, and you talk about a South American player and you say, oh, well, where do you want to see him go? Italy, Spain. Oh, why? Because it's technical. Okay, cool. And I think that attitude, that idea, seeps down into the culture. And then you talk to players who are leaving, oh, where do you want to go? Italy, Spain, technical. I've asked Miguel Almiron over the years probably 4 times in proper sit-down interviews about and off camera as well. Another set of times about where he wants to play, where he wanted to play, what he wanted from his career beyond Atlanta, and it was very specific. It was the Premier League. I said, why the Premier League? And not only did he say the Premier League, did he identify it, which is different from almost everything you hear from Latin American players. But he said, when I asked why, he said the pace, the physicality, and the competition. And those are all the things that people say will be detriments to technical, smallerish, usually Latin players. And Miguel wants that. That's what Miguel sees as the strength of his game. He competes defensively. He is lightning fast. Like, if you say physicality and you think, okay, a tall center back with broad shoulders, I might think physicality and think a gazelle, Miguel Almiron, who can run past that guy and render him useless. And I think Miguel sees the league and is confident in himself that this league is not maybe necessarily the challenge that everybody thinks it's going to be. And trust me, on the ESPN FC desk, they question whether he's going to be able to handle it physically. I spoke to at least one high-level MLS executive during the playoffs, although I'm limiting who it could be now, but whose team was eliminated by Atlanta in the playoffs, who shared their doubts about whether Almiron could hack it in the Premier League just on physicality. So I think from that perspective, it's really unique. He's a unique player. We need to acknowledge what he is. Secondly, Newcastle doesn't play like Atlanta. Atlanta dominates the ball. And so that, to me, is the big question mark here is, what does Almiron look like on a non-ball game dominant team? Because that's not what he's stepping into at Newcastle. I think there's a bunch of ways that Rafa Benitez could use him. And boy, you step into a good manager who's going to find a role for you and who clearly had his eye on Miguel for a long time. That's another part that makes this, for me, a great situation. But it's just, what type of impact does he have on the game when the team he's playing with isn't the one on the front foot? And more often than not, Newcastle is not going to be the team on the front foot.
I would agree with that. So do you think, like you personally, do you think he adjusts to it well? Do you think he handles the Premier League like it's no problem?
Yeah, and I think we've seen him make multiple moves now. We've seen him go from Paraguay with Cerro Porteño to Argentina and find success. We've seen him go from Argentina to Atlanta, change in language, change in culture, total change in league, and have success. So this kid has proven now, not just once, but twice, that he can move, change leagues, change cultures, in one instance, change languages, and find success. So I think he's really set up well. I can't see why this, other than the fact that I have concerns about Newcastle, I just don't see why Miguel, what in his resume tells me that it's not going to work out. Mm-hmm. Is he lazy? No, he's a people think of him as a number 10, but my God, do you see the ground that the guy covers? He has that Paraguayan, grinder in him. He will do the work. And I think that'll go over a long way in the Premier League. And I think his quality, look, we watch the games, like we know his quality. If all of that data says Miguel, and then Miguel goes and fails, well, then data doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Data doesn't matter. Or the only thing that matters is not the data, but where you end up.
And do you think, speaking of where you'll end up, do you think that Sebastian Giovinco will be able to handle the quality, physicality, and intensity of the Saudi Arabian League?
I don't know, man. We have a lot of stuff on ESPN Plus, but do we have the Saudi Arabian League? I've got to. I
have to check that. I don't know.
If we do, and I don't know, man, I might be in trouble. Yeah, look, that was a crazy one for me as well. And then I think the best part of it is in the statement from the team, Seba thanks PFC for helping with this transition in his career. And then on Instagram, it's a totally different story. I think the drama there is kind of what broke down within that organization and the relationship with Giovinco. Clearly, Bezbachenko goes out, Curtis comes in, so you've got new people who might want to take the team in a new direction. He is 32 and he has been injury prone, but man, if I'm a fan and I hear we got how much money and we lost our guy for $2 million for like between 2 and 3. I mean, I don't care where he goes, France, Saudi Arabia, Australia, at that point, it doesn't matter. That just seems like a really minimal amount to recoup, to give up a year of maybe the greatest player in MLS history. Depending on how you want to define that, right? The player who was playing at the highest level when they were in this league, I think he's in that conversation for sure.
I would agree entirely. And I'm wondering then, do you think that they try to replace him like quickly, like not necessarily in this preseason, maybe this summer, or do you think that they look to sort of establish like, no, we're going to do it differently. We're not going to go out and spend a lot of money on big name DPs anymore. We're going to kind of be a little bit more grassroots.
Well, I mean, if you look at Ali Curtis's past with Red Bull, it would suggest that that they'll go a different way, or that he's capable. Well, I should say that he's capable of building a team, and a very successful one, in a different way. And you hear the reports out of Toronto all the time. They're looking to curb spending. They had to pay and overpay, frankly, for all these guys. For Giovinco, Altidore, Bradley, they overpaid. Not necessarily because the players were not as good as what the money dictated, but because Toronto was a disaster. They were trying to, attract players back to not just MLS, but to a TFC team that hadn't won anything. And so you got to overpay. That happens in every sport. If you're a bad team or in a spot that's uncertain, you got to overpay for your guys. And they got a lot out of that. They were relevant in the city. They won titles. They almost won a major international title and made history in that regard. So they got a lot out of it. But now when you hear these reports of curbing spending, I don't know that we're going to see and, look at Josie's got a year on his contract. I'm sure Michael's situation, I think it's pretty similar. So it seems like TFC in many ways is getting ready for the end of an era, turning of the page. What they do after that, I don't know. But I think any idea of certainly an immediate replacement, I mean, time's up. There's the way the MLS schedule is. If you're going to have to wait till the summer, and you probably want to wait till the summer anyway. And this goes back to our earlier point about the winter transfer window being a dud. At least within like the European realm, and I guess we're starting to see that here too. There's just not that many, like, if you want to go for a big name designated player, you're probably looking, if you're Toronto, maybe you're either looking to South America or Europe. In this moment, the guys who are available are not the guys you want to be spending big money on. You want to wait till the summer where that pool is a lot deeper. So I think you're going to see, I think we would have seen that had Lucho gone. You cannot, you're just basically punting in some ways on that player and the plan of the first 6 months of the season, because there's no way to replace these guys before March 3rd. Not the way the world market is set up.
So I was actually going to ask you if there were any other deadline days that you wanted to discuss or that stood out to you. It feels like you kind of just re-answered that question. So instead, I'll go to the other, like one of the other main reasons we wanted to have you on is actually not even just talking about the U.S. national team. Before we do that, I wanted to talk to you about your work that you've been doing as a sideline reporter, because I think it was it the playoffs that you first, at least that was the first time I noticed you doing the halftime interviews in both English and Spanish and doing the sort of translation on the fly. When did you start doing that, and why did you start doing that?
Well, so we've done it. I've done it kind of in isolated incidents when it was needed before. I think the first time I did was actually 5-6 years ago when I was in Houston. Bonia Garcia had a big game for the Dynamo, and you had to talk to him. So we brought him over and we just did it, and it worked. And it was like, wow, that was kind of cool. And for whatever reason, we didn't really go back to that well a ton while we were in Houston. Maybe at that time, Brad Davis, Tally Hall were the stars of the team. We were talking to them a lot. And so maybe that was that team's reality. But now the more and more you get around MLS teams and games, like how many times do you watch a game where it's a 3-1 win and the three guys that have scored all speak Spanish and the three guys who assisted all speak Spanish too?
If it's Houston 100% of the time. If it's the Houston Dynamo every time, yeah.
The post-game interview is with like a center back. You're like, wait, what? Like it's inconsistent. You're like, this doesn't make sense. So anyway, so we did it. The first times I really did it at ESPN were actually not soccer. It was the Little League World Series, which I is one of the other kind of projects I get to work on here. And we started doing that. I was covering the international bracket, talking to kids from, I think that year it was Dominican Republic. We had a team from Mexico, team from Venezuela as well. And so I started talking to their parents and telling those stories over the air in English. And in MLS, we did it a couple times this year. But, you mentioned Houston as and it is a totally very, very Latino team. Mm-hmm. But Atlanta's stars are Latino. And I had maybe done one Atlanta game in March, I think, an Atlanta DC game actually. And I think we did do something with Tata at halftime, but it was, kind of brief. And then once we had an Atlanta game like every week in the playoffs and we were doing it week in, week in, week out, I think that's when people were like, oh, wow, this is, I hope people enjoyed it. But I think beyond that, people were like, oh, wow, this is almost the new norm when you watch an MLS broadcast. You're almost like expecting it because we had done it, week after week. And that Atlanta storyline really allowed us to do it and do it in a fun setting, right? Like people point to the dual interview we did with Joseph and Miguel. Mm-hmm. Well, because they're in a great mood. They're in front of 70,000 people. That was fun because of the setting and because of their personalities and because we had them there together. And I think that Atlanta lightning in a bottle was something that allowed for this thing to happen where people are like, oh yeah, I like that. And that's cool. Let's keep doing it.
But do you think like that great mood, for example, with Martinez and Almiron, do you think part of that is that they're able to just respond to you and that they don't they're not trying to like say it in English where they might say something wrong, or even just like trying to speak at a second language? Sometimes you can have that sort of like you're thinking about it a bit more, so you're not speaking as like extemporaneously and naturally. Do you feel like you get sort of more honest or more direct answers because it is just sort of that quick back and forth?
Yeah, for sure. I think, Spanish was my first language, then English dominated, and now Spanish is the weaker of the two languages for me. So even sometimes when I'm speaking in Spanish, I don't sound certainly, I'm not as eloquent as I am in English, and maybe sometimes I have to think about things, and I can certainly understand that reality for somebody who isn't like me, who maybe only picked up English. And that's really, in many cases, maybe these guys studied it a little bit in school. Some of them do have a pretty good working base, but it's still not your primary language. And language is all about comfort, like how we express ourselves. If I have a command of the language, I'm going to express myself more clearly. So yeah, I think the guys do get relaxed. I think for me, especially when I was, writing, or I think if you want to get more out of somebody, it's good to come to them in their language. They're going to be able to explain themselves better. They're going to be able to be more humorous. They're going to be able to, maybe it's easier to tell a joke. They know how to be funny in Spanish. They don't know how that translates in English. And so I think, yeah, in some ways, just being able to communicate with somebody in their language brings out the best version of them. And hopefully that's what you saw in those interviews with, Miguel, Joseph, and Tata, and whoever else, that we were talking to. And for them, they know, once they trust that your translation is not going to stink, they know they can give you something, and in some cases too much. Like one time Joseph cursed on camera, and I had to clean that up. But, we managed, and I think he actually did that to me. It was like that third or fourth time we done. He did it almost as a curveball to be like, let's see how this guy cleans this up. So we have some fun with it, and they're good dudes too. I'm happy that Miguel's leading the league, but by all accounts and everything I saw in all my time with him, he's a good dude. Joseph, for as serious and kind of cool as he looks, was a pretty good guy as well. So it's good to work with these guys that that want to be a part of it and that appreciate it. I was lucky enough to be at Joseph's MLS MVP award, and he was really, really nervous about giving that speech in English, but he did it. So he also appreciates the value of crossing over in languages and making the effort to communicate. And some guys, some soccer players, some footballers don't care; they just don't. But those two guys did, and for me as somebody's trying to tell their story, you have to be appreciative. That they're willing to let you be a little part of it.
Well, I am appreciative of what you do. I'll say that because, to your earlier point when you're talking about, it would be like a forward scoring 3 goals, and then you're talking to the English-speaking center back. You don't get a lot of analysis or that, in the moment analysis from that player. And I think when you're doing it, it feels like because you're able to ask them those questions, you're able to get sort of that player who they wouldn't otherwise be interviewing who scored those 3 goals. But my question for you then is, I guess the value of that is only I guess it's measured by the questions you're asking. And if you were then just asking how does it feel to score 3 goals, or are you happy with scoring 3 goals, then even if you're still able to translate, that's great. But yes, of course he's going to be happy. And I feel like you do a very good job of asking questions to make them feel relaxed, and then asking questions that actually inform the viewer, tactic-wise, or just even the emotional moment of what was happening when he took that shot. So I just wanted to say I find that very impressive, but I also wanted to ask you how you're able to do that on the fly while doing the translating. How do you know what you're going to ask? Does that evolve in the interview, or do you kind of know going in?
I have no fucking clue, man. I don't know. I do. No. So I think I've been really lucky in my career to work with some really good people and have some really good experiences. And one of those experiences that specifically when it comes to questions, right, was at the Olympics with NBC in 2016. And I had a producer who is also worked at the time as Michelle Tafoya's sideline producer for Sunday Night Football with NBC. And, so Michelle Tafoya gets her 2 or 3 questions. And so this producer, along with Michelle, would put hours into just thinking, what are the questions we're going to ask? Mm-hmm. What question? And so I think a lot about the questions I'm going to ask. Sometimes I think too much, because a lot of times the most important thing is just, how do you feel, right? Like in the moment after the big goal, the championship win, how do you feel? Like, let the person's emotions come out. Sometimes the simplest question, the obvious question, is the right question, but we do think a lot about it. So you kind of go into it with a game plan. And then as far as like translating and all that stuff on the fly, the best explanation that I can give people is this. Like, I never or very rarely speak to my mother in English. I rarely, if ever, speak to my father like one-on-one in Spanish. When we sit down at the dinner table, I talk to my dad in English, my mom in Spanish. There's some weird hybrid going on between the three of us. And then sometimes my dad will jump in Spanish, or my mom will switch over to English. And then on top of that, I probably have like serious ADD issues. So my brain functions kind of like it fires off. And I think in that setting, it's actually maybe some of the deficiencies of my brain are actually geared to the chaos of trying to do like four things at once. And so I think just really, I have to thank my parents, because the ability to kind of hear and listen in both languages is not anything it's just the life that's our dinner table. That's just who we are. Like that was my upbringing. And so this is really maybe the first time in my career where I was like, oh my gosh, like having this kind of weird half identity where I was never sure really if I fit into one world or the other. It was actually somehow useful. It was perfect. Because in this setting, I feel really, when I'm supposed to be thinking in English but talking in Spanish or vice versa, I'm very comfortable.
So that's especially amazing to me, because I cannot imagine, like, those seem like very tight quarters you're in when you're doing those sort of very quick, like, halftime interviews, and it seems like it couldn't possibly be comfortable. And then with the person you're interviewing, I'm sure sometimes doesn't want to be doing that interview. So I'm also wondering, like, who is the most sort of like intimidating person, or the person that you were sort of like, oh boy, like you were getting a weird energy off of when that interview started?
Does it have to be a Spanish language?
No. Anybody.
I'll tell you what, dude. You don't want to keep Bob Bradley waiting when he's trying to get into the locker room at halftime. Because this is one thing, I really do appreciate about Bob. It's like, Bob is pretty much the same all the time, and he hates it when you call him intense, but he's very direct. So let's use the word direct. Mm-hmm. He'll shake your hand and he'll look you in the eye. And man, Bob Bradley has a pretty lock-in, gaze. And when your camera guy's hustling over, it's almost like he's tapping his feet with his eyes. And so, he's one you don't want to keep waiting. But all these guys are, you pull any guy out unless his team's up 2 or 3-0. No coach wants to talk. Mm-hmm. No coach wants to talk kind of in game. They're guarded. They're intense. Their mind is elsewhere, and they really have to like come down. You got to remember, they're in like an adrenaline like spot, and a lot of them are former players, so the adrenaline kind of comes naturally. And then all of a sudden, there's like a mic in front of them on TV, and they got to kind of change the decorum which they were operating just seconds or minutes ago. So I appreciate that it's a lot we ask, but I would say generally you don't want to keep. I try to have my camera guys there like ready to go, because usually in pregame or postgame or during the week, if your camera guy's setting up his mic or adjusting his light or whatever it is, you can say, oh, well, you can make small talk. At halftime, there's no small talk. Just get the damn interview, get the question in, and get out of their way. That's what they want.
Flipping it around, though, has there ever been a moment when you were sort of like, don't you need to get into the locker room? Like, why are you still talking? Like, is there one person who maybe talks a bit longer than you would expect in those situations?
I'm trying to think, man. There was definitely one this year. I forget who it was. I asked like one question, and it's funny. The PR guy, usually the PR guy will say, "Hey, you only have time for one question," mm-hmm. And then like depending on how well the coach, or how short the first answer is, or how much you want to push the PR guy, or what that second question is really worth it. You try and like get in the second question. God, I'm forgetting who it was. But, I gave him one question. I had the second question all lined up. And then the guy's talking, like 45 seconds later, the PR guy comes around, his coach is back and is telling me to rap. I'm like, it's your coach that's talking, you know? So yeah, I mean, there are guys who, when they get on something, they just go. But some coaches too are very intentional with the way they answer, and those, you know, they're going to give you 2 sentences max. All right. And they're not trying to get back. You know, they're not trying to hang out with you at that time.
So on the scale of unnamed coach who talks a lot and Bob Bradley, where is Gregg Berhalter?
Gregg's really interesting, man. Okay. You know, because we got to spend quite a bit of time with him in Arizona, both on camera. We did 3 interviews with him on camera, pre, half, and post. And then, but before the game, you know, we sat down, I think, for 45 minutes or an hour and just kind of talked, our broadcast crew and Berhalter. So it's interesting, right? I think I'll get to the conversations first on camera. The interviews on game day were very short, almost, I would say. Like, he was not expansive at all. And almost to the point where it surprised me, especially in our pregame interview. I thought I'd asked pretty direct questions that really couldn't be kind of avoided or dodged. And he especially on my first question, I remember he didn't give me anything. I said, what do you want to see today? Structure and these kind of vague, things that aren't clear. And I don't like that. And so I think on game day, Gregg Berhalter is a totally different type of interview than he is non-game day. When you talk to Gregg Berhalter in a non-game situation, he is extremely clear in his communication. So you will come away from an answer knowing exactly what Gregg wanted you to understand. And not just he's good at communication, he's good at, I think, educational communication. So he can tell you something, and even if you're not a master in that subject, you walk away with a better, if not complete, understanding to your best level of that topic. He's really good at you sitting down and you come away from a conversation with Gregg, and you can say, I know exactly what we were talking about, and I know exactly why A leads to B leads to C, which, geez, for a coach is an incredible skill to have. So I think on game days, you're going to get a different Berhalter at the mic because he closes up. And this is something that I think it was Taylor Twellman was telling me. He's like, Gregg was like this as a player. All week, he's cool, relaxed, listening to rap music, laughing it up, having a personality, talking a lot. And he said about 24 hours from game day as a player, Gregg would drop off planet Earth. No talking, super serious, blah, blah, blah. That's how he was. And he said, get ready for that now with the national team, because if you think you're going to get the answers that you got on Tuesday, on Saturday, you're not. So you need to ask different questions. And I think I learned that, not the hard way, but I think as I went back and looked at the first pregame interview we did, I saw a different Berhalter than I had experienced throughout the rest of the week and that I was expecting. And that's probably true in many ways of a lot of coaches.
Do you feel like that level of communication that he brings is something that's been lacking from the U.S. men's national team? Because I feel like there hasn't been as good of communication. The players haven't quite known what was expected and how they were supposed to fulfill those expectations. I'm wondering if you think that's a strength that Berhalter is bringing.
The short answer to that is yes, and I think it's actually the most important strength that he's bringing. To know how bad the communication was, you'd have to get some of the guys who played under Arena and Klinsmann to say it on record. What I will say is this, is I have tried to ask that question and some all off camera, and it's all usually off the record when you talk to these guys, unless there's something they really want you to get out. Just to talk about Gregg. And then, for the guys who were in an Arena camp or a Klinsmann camp to make a comparison. And without saying that, they've said that. And I'll put it to you this way. For me, there will be no ambiguity about many things, right? So, let's put it this way, right? Gregg Berhalter has talked to a lot of players, right? He talked to Bill Hamid. Bill Hamid wasn't, he called 4 goalies into his camp, and Bill wasn't even in that group, and Bill still got a call from Gregg Berhalter. Do you think the 5th goalie last year for the U.S. got a call from Bruce Arena?
No.
Or going back 2 years, Klinsmann? And not only got a call, but an explanation of why he wasn't called in, that he was still very much a part of the program, what the things were that he could work on to improve his standing, and that they would be in touch down the road, right? And then when I think it's Mark McKenzie gets dropped from the game day roster the next day, Berhalter's having a one-on-one with him in the lobby of the hotel off to the side. Very personal, just the two of them, great eye contact. They give the bro hug at the end. Clear communication, why you were selected, why you were left out. Players are going to know exactly where they stand with this coach. And to your point, I think that was not the case with other managers. Beyond that, though, his tactical ideas. Look, I'm not a professional player. Yet when Gregg sits down and talks tactics, I can come away with an understanding of what he wants his guys to do. So not only are Gregg's players going to know exactly where they stand in the grand scheme of things, they're going to know exactly, I'm telling you exactly, what they're supposed to do in every given situation, what they're supposed to do. One of the players was telling me, so they go over it, they talk about it in the classroom, they go over on the whiteboard, then they do it on video, then they go out to the field, and with no defense, they practice it, right? With dummy ball movement, they practice, okay, this situation here, then they drop in defenders to simulate reality. So they're talking about patterns of play in 4 different ways, trying to drill those into these guys. If a coach is that clear with you, when you don't make the pass you're supposed to make, I mean, it's on you, right? It's on you. Yeah. And you have no doubt now. You know exactly what you were supposed to do, so you can do it naturally. You can do it because you know exactly what you've been. So in other eras where we couldn't really define the style and we couldn't really define what people's roles were, and I think you may have to honestly go back to Bob Bradley to find the last coach where you would really be like, this is the style and this is that dude's role, and it's very clear to me. I think Gregg Berhalter, on his communication alone, I think it's his elite. It's the thing that makes him elite. I have a lot of problems with how they arrived at Gregg Berhalter as the coach and the search, but having spent a week with him, if there's a dude that's going to get it right, it's going to be Berhalter. He is going to leave no stone unturned, and then whatever he finds under those stones, he's going to find a way to explain it to players that actually makes them better on the field on the day of the game.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time because you've been very generous already, but I wanted to ask you about those players on the field for a moment, because as that, like being down there on the sideline, you're hearing all the conversation that's going on. I'm wondering, not necessarily with this last game against Panama, but just in general, when you're down there, is there a lot of trash talking going on between the players? And I'm wondering, if not necessarily trash talking, but who are the U.S. men's national team players that you hear the most? As in, you hear constantly talking throughout the game.
You know who I heard the most in this game? It was Gregg.
That makes sense.
Yeah, he was. And of course that's who you're closest to. I think it's tough from the sideline perspective to talk about who speaks the most, because you got to remember I'm seeing it from a sideline. Mm-hmm. So it's natural for me to say, oh, this guy's talking more, or this guy, because I can hear it. The guy on the other side of the field, I may not quite hear as well. Now, in the setting in Arizona the other day, I could hear a lot. And for a sideline,
that is incredibly well put. That is very diplomatic. Yes. Good job.
It was very, very beneficial for me, that setting, because I could hear what they were saying, on the far sideline. I try to take advantage of that and bring that to the broadcast. Hey, this is what he's saying to this guy. This is what he's saying to that guy. What I took actually from that Panama game that I found interesting was the positions on the field that Berhalter was most talking to, and then trying to decipher why. Right, the positions he really seemed super focused on were the top guys in the 4-3-3, like the winger guys, the two top, not Zardes, but Ebobisse and Baird, on the high, like a 4-3-3, the high wing. He was constantly talking to Mihailovic and move this, back, sit, back, press, move, almost like a controller of a. And I'm not saying this in a bad way, because I think it's Mihailovic's first game under Berhalter. He needs to know what Berhalter wants out of that role. Is literally almost telling him where to be. I think that 10. Not 10, it's not a 10, it's kind of dual 10 along with Roldan. That position you can sense is very important to Berhalter, and maybe a little bit undecided. Of course it's undecided. Mm-hmm. And so he was focused a lot on that. I think those 3 positions and those wide positions, because they're so critical in setting a potential press, but also creating that immediate width to hit people on the counter. And it was, so to hear him really with the backdrop of a game telling his guys what to do was really cool. As far as trash talking, man, there's not a ton of trash talk. Mm-hmm. I don't know that guys get into it, but when guys are saying things to each other, I think that stuff happens at more out on the middle of the field, and I think it's not loud. I think it's something whispered in somebody's ear about their mother. Those are the good trash talkers. Don't have to say it loud; they just know what to say.
That is very true. Let me flip that then, and is there a player for the national team, in your experience, who maybe trash talking is the wrong word, but who's gonna sort of, if Michael Bradley is a bad example, if Jeremy Obubase makes a bad pass, is there somebody on the national team that's gonna let him hear about that? Not even in a malicious way, but just is that where you're trying to pass that ball, or kind of giving him a little stick, keeping it light, but sort of letting everybody know that they're watching.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bradley's that guy. You see he talks a lot. Mm-hmm. He's vocal, and it's not always yelling. A lot of times it's just it'll be walking over to a guy and say something in his ear, make a gesture with his hands, and then walk away. And the message was communicated. But I think that's honestly, Taylor, I think that's kind of the question of what's to come. And maybe the question of what went wrong in 2017. Maybe there weren't enough guys who were kind of buck stops here guys. Or maybe the guys who were the buck stops here guys didn't buck stop here hard enough, and things got out of hand. And I think there's a major leadership question with this new U.S. national team. And I'm not saying that to knock on Michael Bradley. It's a natural question. He's been a leader for a long time. There was a failure under his leadership. You can put it that way. He was the captain. And so now we have to reassess who's the captain moving forward, and there's a new generation, and that's just naturally part of it. That doesn't mean Michael Bradley is the worst soccer player ever, or the best soccer player ever, or done with the national team, or going to start 6 games on the road to the semifinals in the World Cup in Qatar. I don't know, but I just think there's an honest and needed discussion about who the next leader is going to be, who that guy is going to be, who when somebody does something they shouldn't on a field, kind of holds them to task. And I don't know that guy is very clear right now. I will say this. You know who I think it's going to end up being? And I think this is not a surprise anyway. It's Tyler Adams.
Really? Okay.
Oh, my God. He will MF anybody. Dude, I bet you that kid is cussing out teammates already at Leipzig.
All right.
No doubt about it. And I'll tell you, it's going back to empty stadium themes. God, I'll get the tournament wrong, but I'm going to try. I think it was the U20 World Cup that he's playing in a couple years ago, and the stadium's empty, and they're playing a group phase game, and it's I think it was their second group phase game, and it's 5 or 6 minutes into the game, and the ball goes out of bounds, and one of his teammates is going over, 5, 6 minutes in, feeling the game out, going over, kind of walking over, get the ball, trying to put it in play. And as the stadium's empty, you can hear Tyler let's effing go. Put the ball in play. Dude, I was oh, this kid's for real. Okay, all right. I've heard, we've heard stories from Red Bull practice. He's not afraid to say what needs to be said. So, but he's still a young kid, right? And there's always those group dynamics. He's coming in, Bradley's there. Other guys who are senior to him are there. Can he really look them in the eye and tell them what's up? He'll have to conquer those things if he is going to be the leader. But look, there's been young leaders before, and they've stepped up and told older guys what was what. But I think Tyler Adams has within the kind of young American prospect core, has a unique personality. I think a really unique personality, and I think it'll serve him well wherever he goes. But certainly with the national team, it's something the national team seems to need.
I somehow still have 40 questions left, but that seems like a very good point to end on. But I did want to ask you before you get out of here. I know you've got to head over to the studio right now. You got work to do. What are you all discussing today?
I got to check my email. No, I think we'll be doing. There's a lot of stuff that we just haven't gotten to because we've had the craziness of the last few days. But we have Craig Burley in today. We didn't get his thoughts on all the sorry stuff yesterday as a former Chelsea player and somebody that even to this day kind of knows the inner workings of that club very well. I'm very, very curious to hear what he has to say. We will also be talking about kind of what happened with MLS yesterday, this Lucho thing, how it fell apart, what it means for the league. I think for the longest time, the league was kind of on the outside looking in of the international transfer market. And I think actually what's happened now is that the fact that the league exists on this the fact that the league doesn't exist on a FIFA calendar has now actually positioned it to, in a few years, really be the king of the winter transfer market. If the type of players that we've seen leave the league continue to be brought into the league. So with guys like Ale Moreno and stuff, I have a good discussion on that. And then, whatever pops up, like whatever the news of the day is, we'll yell about it and yell at each other. And that's kind of the vibe of the show, right? Like, we may not always wear ties, and we may not always like try to, give you 30 to 45 seconds of exactly this or that or that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you we're the tightest show, but I mean, I think we have fun, and I hope the people who watch us like learn a little bit about soccer, football, but also enjoy that they can laugh. We can laugh at each other, laugh at ourselves, and I hope people at home laugh a little too.
I think they do. Well, Sebastian, Seba, Sebi, Basti, Sebas, Salazar, thank you very much. I left out the one that only your mom's allowed to say. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show and talk so many different things.
No worries, and if I could say one more thing, I know your co-host has had a difficult diagnosis of late. I myself am a cancer survivor, not all that long ago, and so just give Daryl my best. If he wants any tips for chemo, tell him I got a few tricks up my sleeve that I'd be glad to pass along. And I think he may have tweeted about this yesterday. There's definitely a mob mentality in American soccer sometimes, and as somebody who's offered more than one bad hot take on Twitter, I've been on the wrong end of that mob mentality. I hope all you people that listen to this and want to crap on my bad takes or anybody else's bad takes, let's use that mob mentality here, whether it's financially or just sending messages like, give Daryl the love he needs. Because when you're going through something like that, you'd be surprised at like what the things are that like tick you over a day or through a treatment or whatever it is. So you may not think that whatever you're doing is super big for somebody, but don't be so sure that it's not received much larger than what you think you're giving.
I liked Sebastian Salazar before this interview. I'm pretty sure I love you at this point. So thank you for that. And I'm sure that means a lot to Daryl. And I'm guessing he will take you up on those tips. So thank you for that. Maybe you all can discuss those on air or not. But we would love to have you back.
Yeah, definitely.
It was chatting with you.
Ask him about the first time he pees after chemo. It's an interesting experience. I'll tell you that much.
I'm fascinated and terrified all at once. Perfect.
I told you. What did I tell you? It's all about knowing what questions to ask.
There we go. There we go. That is a perfect point to end on. So, Sebastian, thank you again. It's very much appreciated.
Of course. Thanks for having me.